Good evening, everyone. My name is Annie Black. I am the Director of Programs and Volunteers at the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum. Thank you all for joining us for tonight's History Highlights program, Network of Mass Murder, the Nazi Concentration Camps. I'd like to start by thanking our community partners for this program, JCC Dallas, Jewish Family Service of Greater Dallas, Legacy Senior Communities, Mosaic Family Services, Southwest Jewish Congress, Temple Shalom, and the Texas Holocaust, Genocide, and Anti-Semitism Advisory Commission. Thank you all so much for your support of the museum and our programs. I would also like to give a special welcome to our museum members, board members, and volunteers joining us this evening. We couldn't put on programs like tonight's without your support. If you are not yet a member or a volunteer and are interested in learning more, please visit our website, dhhrm.org. We will leave plenty of time for questions at the end of tonight's program. At any point during the talk, please feel free to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to type out and submit your question, and we'll answer as many of those as we can. I would now like to turn things over to tonight's presenter, Dr. Charlotte Decoster, the museum's Ackerman Family Director of Education. Charlotte?
Hi, thank you, Annie. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our program. I am going to share my screen and hope that technology is on my side. Today, I want to talk to you about a big part that is featured in our Shoah Holocaust wing in the exhibition is the camp system, and really the system of the network of mass murder that is built in during the Holocaust and under the Nazi regime. Before I want to get started on that, I wanted to really briefly talk first about the research that has come before this presentation. This is not something that has always been out there and where people have always had discussion when it comes to Holocaust and Nazi German history about the magnitude of the camp system. It is only more in the more recent decades that it has become more to the forefront, and that is because many years of research that have become before it, starting in the 90s. And some of this research was led from the United States Holocaust Museum, Holocaust Memorial Museum, who started its work on their Encyclopedia of Camps and Ghettos. And for this project, they worked one very closely with the research project at Yad Vashem, the Israeli Museum, on conducting the study of the ghetto system, but also expanded out there with the expansion of the camp system as well, and starting that investigation. This research was led by Dr. Jeff McGargy, who I had the fortune to get to know really well during his work at the United States Holocaust Museum. And really how he approached it is he had a lot of different researchers out there reporting on these different campsites that they were aware of, both in Europe and the United States. And that really started the building of the framework of the understanding that we have today of the camp system. Another part that is exhibition-wise is because of this new research and a lot of work that has been done, more exhibitions have been focusing on that expansiveness of the camp system and how that camp system really works in connection with Nazi Germany and also with the Holocaust, and how it can provide us a better understanding of the history that is behind the Holocaust and Nazi Germany. And one of those examples is from the Kupperberg Holocaust Center, who actually has an exhibition, which is virtual available as well, that really gives you an understanding of how the camp system is built. And so I'm going to share at the end of the presentation, I'm going to share these links with you in the chat, so you have these links available too, so you don't need to be writing them down right now. I'll make sure that you have them accessible to click on as well at the end. But I wanted to start with that conversation about that unimaginable scale of the camp system and the density. This right here is actually an image from our exhibition. And as far as I know, it's probably the most detailed and extensive physical map, not virtual map, or digital map, but actual physical map that uses the data points of the camp and the ghetto system to show the expansiveness of the camp. This map right here shows about 6% of that Konzentrationslager system or the camp system. And it gives you really an idea of the density in certain locations, especially in Germany itself, but also in the East when we look at the ghettoization of Europe as well. And this is where I'm hoping that my technology is going to be on my side, but I'm going to remove my PowerPoint really quick. This is my daughter in the background. And I want to take you to that link. And Annie just let me know as well that if you don't get them in the chat today, but I'm actually going to drop this link already in the chat too, if you want to follow along on your computer too. But this map is from that exhibition at the Kupferberg Holocaust Center. And it really allows you to kind of go in and see these networks. And of course, this is possible digital, right? Because you can have these zoom in features. So this really shows how these networks, how this camp system is spread out. So I really recommend, I don't have too much time today to go in it, but to maybe take at some point a moment and look at this map and look at that expansiveness. And you can see how some of these camp networks that I'm going to be talking about, especially that satellite system, which I'll go into, that you can see really well how that feeds into it and the different camps. If you look at the little lighter dots, those are the ghettos as well. So you can see on this map, this is a kind of great map for you to browse around and look at, besides, of course, the map that we have in our museum to come physically see this as well. But what these maps do, both the map in our museum and the map from this exhibition I just showed you, is that, again, it shows that density, right? And the magnitude of what the camp system was. And that is so hard for our brain to wrap around what that magnitude was. We, of course, usually hear about the big camps like Dachau and Bergen-Belsen and Buchenwald, but we don't think about the extensions of where these camps reach, the labor camps attached to them, the farming camps, all of these different ones. And that's what I want to really delve into, is how is this system set up? Not just looking at these major camps, which we'll look a little bit at today as well, but how do we go from just a small little prison camp at the very beginning to this massive system that is interconnected with all kinds of different levels in it, that comes to the scale that we look at this map today, from all the way in Norway to North Africa, into Russia, into France, wherever the Nazis went, that camp system basically comes with them. And as Annie mentioned, please, as I'm talking this evening, please feel free in the Q&A button to share your questions or comments in there as well. I'll have them in front of me so I can follow them too. So as I just mentioned, this camp system didn't start just bam, it wasn't all built. It took a while to be implemented. And so we can see 5 different clear phases when we look at the camp system. This early system is this early implementation, usually known by Holocaust and Nazi German historians as the early camps phase, is really a time where the Nazis start figuring out how are we going to do it. There's really no structure yet behind the camps. Let me say it that way. Actually, what we know is that there was no plan, no coordination towards the camp system before the Nazis came to power, and that really was something that came with them as Hitler became chancellor in January of 1933. The quick shift that happened was just a month later in February of 1933 when the Reichstag fire happened. And with that, the justice system started being implicated in this as well. And we see widespread arrests and these prisons and prison camps. And I'm not talking yet about these full-fledged camps that we'll see. We'll start seeing the beginning of Dachau, but at this point, that is really still an exception. There is no national system whatsoever when we look at the early camps. It's these small prison camps. A lot of times they're in the middle of cities, and they're these prisons that are transformed more into these prison camps. But we're starting to see some of the little bit of the labor camps building, but it is very, very minimal. The focus during this phase is really on communists and these early political opponents that are seen as a threat to the Nazis coming to power. It's a continuation in the sense of that political civil war that has been happening between the communists and the Nazis for quite a while that spills into these into this early camp system with the communists and socialists being arrested in that. And so we see, that first year, a really big increase in these prison camps, to the point that by the time we get to 1934, we actually see back of a drop off because we start getting the institutionalization of the camp system. This institutionalization is going to be based off the Dachau model. Dachau becomes the first clear concentration camp that builds the structure that we're going to see of the command and then the understructures all the way basically to the health supervisor in the camps as well. And based on this Dachau model, Theodor Eicke, the second commander of Dachau, is going to create camps modeled after that. The first ones that we're going to see coming out of this time period is going to be Buchenwald concentration camp and Sachsenhausen concentration camp. It is during this time period that these smaller prison camps are going to start closing that were open in the early camps phase. So these camps located in cities, in the middle of cities, or these smaller ones that might have been run more by a state ministry or by the SA as well. The camps from the SA, we're going to see the closure of them as well. So this institutionalization phase is going to be marked by a drop down in prisoners and also a drop down in the number of camps because they're going to become more organized. What we are going to see during this time period is an increase of functionaries, is prison guards and prison camp officials who are going to be working in these camps. We're going to see that starting to drive up, and that's really where that institutionalization is going to come. Because of that, we're going to see a switch to the implementation of the patch system and the marking of prisoners. We're going to see the implementation of uniforms. None of that you're going to see in that early camps phase. And actually, once we get to the latter phase, when we get to wartime and liquidation, we're going to see some of that structure kind of fall away back again too. But coming out of 1936, moving into 1937, we now have a more nationalized base system under the supervision of the SS that is ready for rapid expansion. And that expansion is going to start in late 1937 and really start spiking up after the annexation of Austria and, of course, after Kristallnacht. In that early phase of rapid expansion, again, the focus is going to shift on political prisoners. They are going to really be marked for this. We're also going to see is what the Nazi consider habitual criminal prisoners, asocials, homosexuals are going to start falling under this, prostitutes, anybody who does not fit under the ideal of Nazism in this pure Nazi German society, who does not fit in with that. We're going to see them fall. And that's really going to increase the numbers. Of course, Kristallnacht, November 1910, of 1938 is going to really mark that open persecution of the Jews and the mass arrest of Jews throughout Germany and Austria. With Kristallnacht and in this phase of rapid expansion of the camp system, we're now going to see an overflow of the camps. And with that, we're going to see an extreme increase in abuse. Torture is going to happen during this phase starting in 1938. And of course, the worsening of conditions in the camps, specifically aimed at the Jews. So once we really see the camp system being targeted towards Jews, we can really closely correlate that with the worsening of the conditions and especially abuse in the camps as well. By the way, it's during this time period that we're going to see some of these other large camp complexes open, like Flossenburg concentration camp, some of the camps in Austria, like Mauthausen concentration camp, and of course, Ravensbrück as well during this time. In 1939, when the war starts, now we start shifting to a phase of wartime expansion, and that's probably the phase you're most commonly familiar with when it comes to the camp system. It is not only the expansion of how the camp system works, but the camp system itself as well. So first, how the camp system works, right? Before, the focus was building on these one large singular camps like Buchenwald, Dachau, right? Following that Dachau model. We're going to see a shift from that and the creation of these camp networks with satellite camps during this time period. We're also going to see the ghettoization of, especially of the East, where Jews are forced in these enclosed areas and into ghettos, and that becomes part of the camp system. It needs to fall under that supervision and that control of SS and that structure that comes in it. We're also going to see the expansion of the labor camps and specifically creation of labor camps, and how these satellite camps will feed into that. Auschwitz camp complex is a great example of that, who has an immense war industry behind that is served by the labor camps attached to Auschwitz. So overall, we see this massive expansion that is not just happening in Germany, but we're going to see that in the countries that are occupied by Germany as well, and also countries that are allied with Germany. And that's important to understand as well. We're going to see collaborator countries work with the Nazis to build their own camp systems as well. And that is important to understand too, is that creates that widespread, that map that we can see from North Africa. Basically, if they're allied with Nazi Germany or if Nazi Germany has occupied that area, we're going to see the camp system expand into that. The final phase is the liquidation and liberation phase. And you know, I always struggle. Some historians more put that date in 1943, some in 1945, but really we slowly see that with the summer of 1943, especially the Eastern camps, but really by 1944. And you might ask, well, you know, when we think of the Holocaust, the last major group of Jews from Hungary are not deported until 1944. But if we really look at the Eastern side, that's where we're going to see the liberation starting happening in 1944 of the Eastern camps. And that includes Majdanek, the Majdanek camp complex, that includes Majdanek death camp. And So with that liberation, we are also seeing the liquidation happening, because the realization starts happening is if prisoners fall in hands, how will this be used with that? And that is in particular for the camps that are not run by the SS. We're going to see camps run today also by the army, by the Wehrmacht, and that liquidation is going to go even faster, especially when it comes to prisoners of war, and moving that prisoner population basically inwards, away from the front lines, and liquidating everything that could be liberated rather than allowing the camps to be liberated. And so that liquidation feeds into the death march system of marching prisoners from camp to camp to camp. It also feeds into the massive overcrowding and the conditions that we'll especially see in the West when Western allies are liberating the camps, especially in Germany. Overcrowding like Bergen-Belsen concentration camps where people are starving because it's so overcrowded, conditions are so extreme that basically they're sitting there until liberation, with the guards just continuing to abuse and increasing the living conditions in those camps. Again, if you have any questions, I'm going to move forward, but you're welcome to put them in the Q&A as I go along. So talking about this magnitude, right? The number. At the museum on our amazing map, we have approximately 43,500 camps. And really, we don't know the exact number of camps there were within the camp system. The reason for that is one is defining exactly what a camp is and figuring out, especially in the early camp phases, and then in these intermediary phases, is camps opened and closed. So the idea is for it to officially be a camp is it needs to have imprisoned prisoners in a setting where they could not leave for at least 60 days with about 90 prisoners. And so we can go from very small camps for about 100 prisoners to camps with thousands of prisoners when we go to the Auschwitz camp complex. In that estimated total, it probably ranges from about 43,000 to about 45,000. If we really start looking at some of the smaller camps run by the Wehrmacht as well, and also by the Ordnungspolizei, we're probably going to be closer to 45,000 on that. So I placed my total estimate here around 44,000. And that is always the difficulty, right? Is tracing back some of that evidence, especially from the camps in the East, but even camps in the West. I always say, the great example is when I was flipping through the encyclopedia is just looking at my hometown where I came from in Belgium, realizing that, just flipping through that book, that there was a small camp located literally where in the field next to it, there was where I went to school was a little castle, and there was a small camp run there, which was mainly a resistance camp for Belgian resistors in it. But it just shows you this, our understanding of the camp is usually Buchenwald or Dachau, some of these big camps, but there's quite a variety in it. So today I really wanted to focus on those different types of camps, and you can see some of their numbers here. The large concentration camps, what we call the core camps. We'll look at them in just a second. There's about 23. There is debate still among historians who fall on it, but most historians agree that there is about 23 of these large concentration complexes that exist under the Nazi regime. That these large concentration camps are fed into by these satellites and subcamps, which sometimes can go to the size of a Texas county. That's how large they can be. The other one firm number that we do have is the death camps. There is 6 death camps. So these are camps specifically for the murder of the Jews. We'll look at them in a little bit as well. So that is a very firm number. Also the Euthanasia Centers And I put between quotation marks in there hospitals as well. We'll look at that in a little bit, but these are the killing centers for the mentally and physically disabled or considered handicapped by the Nazis. The euthanasia centers are going to be in Germany. Those hospitals are going to be in Poland, in the occupied territories in what is Poland. Then the vast majority of camps that fall under this wider system that go from very small to very large are the forced labor camps, usually run by the SS, but frequently run by corporations as well. Then with the ghettos as well, as I earlier mentioned, that has been by amazing research also conducted by Yad Vashem, that we are closer to that number, but it's still also a number that we'll probably through research in future years, we'll find out more. Then I put approximately 12 deportation and transit camps. We will look some at the Western camps. There is a lot of historical debate between what is a deportation camp and what is not a transit camp. Theresienstadt, for example, is a great example that falls in some of these multiple categories, hence that average there. One that you might not expect on this list is brothels, which are both run by the Wehrmacht and the SS, and came frequent camps, and there was quite a lot. You can see approximately 500. These, again, this is an estimate because, as you can imagine, the Nazis were not as forthright on documenting all of these brothels. And some of that evidence, some of the information that we have on them are just no longer existent on that. And then another big chunk right there is the prisoner of war camps. Those are going to be run by the Wehrmacht or the German army. And then a whole chunk of other camps that I won't be able to go into each one of them today. Germanization facilities. These are camps in which Poles, Eastern Europeans that were German Aryan enough that could be Germanized were placed in, frequently women and children. Some of the camps that were under Lebensborn is creating more Nazis through birth. Camps fall under that as well. Then we have the Axis run camps. Of course, these are camps that, and ghettos, by the way, ghettos too, that are run by allies of the Nazis, from Hungary to Croatia, Romania, all of those fall under in there as well. Custody camps, those are short-term prison camps, usually for criminal prisoners, but of course under Nazism, that term is very, very wide. Special camps, worker education camps, actual prisons that will fall under that as well. Preferential camps, punishment camps, and you see my ... too. If you're really into researching that, I really recommend deep diving in that immense encyclopedia on the camps and the ghettos. You can get full list and details of how each camp is run and how it operates. But I want to look at that top list of type of camps first. So first is the concentration camps, or the Konzentrationslager. Those is this network of 23 main camps that will feed into that larger network that will, those satellite camps, about 1,500. The purpose of these camps, why they're founded, these are the camps that are modeled after Dachau. So the main camp of Ravensbrück, Mauthausen, Bergen-Belsen are all modeled of the main camp of Dachau. And they are set up in the same structure with the same level of officials running them, commander, second commander, that same SS structure, physicians in place. So that is similar in all of these 23 camps. The purpose, as these camps are founded, is to imprison, and again between quotation marks, is enemies of the state. And of course, that ranges anything from racial enemies like the Jews, Roma Sinti, homosexuals to political prisoners, political threat, ideological threats, resistors. You know, it's a very wide range. The second purpose is to eliminate individuals and small targeted groups of individuals by murder away from the public and judicial review. So really this is being able to imprison people without having justice, in a sense, fully outside of the judicial network that the Nazis are also fermenting very strongly as well, with that as well. And then third, the purpose is, and that is going to build, is to filter prisoners so they may be exploited for forced labor. And that is feeding into the war regime that the Nazis are building. And that is really going to start, especially once we get to that fourth phase of wartime expansion. And so while the same structure is in place, we can see that those main camps do have similar looks and feels with this as well. Of course, you can see here the gates of Dachau on the top left picture right here. To the right, we see actually a very small resistance camp, which is going to fall under the sub-camps called Brandon concentration camp. But you again see very similar wording, very similar facade front of it. This is actually built in a military fortress, but it is still structured the same way. So the barbed wire fence around it, all of those same structures are going to be in place. And then also once inside that camp, right, the continuous roll call, those structures are put in place with those original core concentration camps. And we're going to see that run through the other camps as well. Actually, in that bottom right picture, you can see roll call at Buchenwald concentration camp happening right there. Then we get to the satellite camps. And this is, to me, where the complexity comes in within the camp system. So I gave you some examples right there to kind of give you an understanding how this works, right? So we have these 23 core camps. Like I put on there examples: Buchenwald concentration camp, Mauthausen concentration camp, Auschwitz. But then they have these vast networks of sub-camps. So if you look at this map right here, and I'm seeing if I can zoom in even a little bit more. So here you have the Dachau camp system right here. And this is actually an image from the Encyclopedia of Camps and Ghettos, who lays out basically all of these sub-camp systems. So you can see the main camp of Dachau located there. But then within that box, what you can see is all of the sub-camps that are located in here and that are part of that framework of the Dachau concentration complex. If you look here at this map right here, and this is a little bit of an outdated map, but I still used it today to give you an understanding. This map is actually from the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. I had to kind of trace it back, like I said, because it is an outdated map, but it still gives you an understanding, because I like the color coding here of how these camp complexes work, right? You can see sometimes how they even overlap right here with the Bergen-Belsen Neugamme system, Buchenwald running into Flossenburg, especially Ravensburg, Sachsenhausen. But you can see the big dots right here are the main camps. And then you can see the sub-camp system built around it. So you can see here Dachau with that. And that gives you kind of an understanding how the satellite camp system works, and then that expansive. The main camps basically filter quite frequently to these sub-camps, and they work as a filtering system. Here in the sub-camps, more of that filtering happens to the labor camps. And these labor camps, as we'll see, there's such a wide variety in there. Also, a lot of times these sub-camps become the housing places for the labor camps as well. And this is why you frequently hear in survivor stories of, we were housed at Auschwitz too, but we went to go work at some farm or some mine, or we were housed at Auschwitz III or Auschwitz Buna, and we actually didn't work at Buna. We went somewhere else. So sometimes the main camps and the sub camps do have become the concentration camp part itself, where the barracks are going to be. And what I'm talking about barracks is, if you're not as familiar with the camp system, these are in horrible conditions, very little food, very bad living conditions that we're going to see in them. And so that's how these satellites, these Außenkommando, are going to work, is they're going to filter in that. So they create these vast networks. And in some cases, right there, this whole network of camps, of this main camp and all of these set camps, can be about the size of a Texas county, or, and you can see in some cases the size of a whole country. When we're looking at some of these northeastern camps in Latvia and Lithuania, in the Baltic countries. Again, feel free to ask questions as I'm going. You can put them in the Q&A button as well. I think the clearest understanding that we have is about the death camp system, because we do have 6 death camps, and they were labeled as Vernichtungslager versus Konzentrationslager. I always get the question from visitors, why is Dachau not a death camp? There was a small gas chamber there. So the death camps, or the Vernichtungslager, are not necessarily labeled as having a gas chamber. It is more, again, about that purpose. Remember, the purpose for the Konzentrationslager is that imprisonment of enemies of the state, filtering prisoners, and then, eliminating small targeted groups of individuals, sometimes by murder, or just removing them from the public and judicial review. The death camps are going to have a very different purpose. Their purpose is established at the Wannsee Conference, and it's going to be the murder of the Jews. So if you ever have to explain to somebody, if you're an educator yourself and you're listening to this, if you need to explain the difference between a concentration camp, those 23, and these 6, the difference in essence, it's their purpose. One is the purpose of imprisonment and detainment in very horrible conditions that can lead to death by various means. Whereas the death camps, their sole purpose is the murder of a very specific group, in this case, the Jews. As a result, the death camps are going to be very small in their structure, and they're not going to be structured or even laid out like the concentration camps. And so this is why I put that image in the middle here, which is actually a map of from the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum of Belgic camp. And you can see, as most camps, including concentration camps, it is located near a rail line, and most of these camps were built, I apologize, near the camp system. But what you're going to see is there's very little barracks, right? Very little buildings in general. The buildings are going to be gas chambers, or going to be around this roll call square and this administration center. They're basically barracks holding items, mainly things that are removed from Jews before they are murdered. And then we're going to have a lot of this kind of orange, which are actually not buildings. Those are fire pits and burial pits in which the bodies of the Jews are thrown after their murder. And so while we think of Auschwitz as this vast camp, actually the death camp part of Auschwitz is very small compared to the concentration camp part. Even if you visit Auschwitz-Birkenau, the concentration camp part is the front area. But if you walk through the back of it, that's where you're going to see the death camp area, where you're going to have, in case of Auschwitz II or Auschwitz-Birkenau, gas chambers 2, 3, 4, and 5 lined up there, where the mass murder is going to happen. So they're very small concentrated areas versus the wider expansiveness of the concentration camp system. What I wanted to show you here too is these camps also become very visible because the murder of the Jews happens there, and the cremation of the bodies, either in actual cremation ovens, structures that are built, or in fire pits in the case of Chelmno, Belgic, Sobibor, and Treblinka. But you can see here from miles away, you can see these death camps in action. And I always show that picture of Majdanek because it just shows that presence, right? And it gives you an understanding again of that camp system, how it works and how visible it was, right? It's not only the magnitude in numbers, but also how it appeared and how it was visible as well. Forced labor camps. This is our biggest category, and it's also where we have the biggest variety in how these camps look. These are the Arbeitslager. And the Arbeitslager, the prisoners in these, again, varied frequently. The Arbeitslager could be filled with prisoners who were arrested for many reasons, be it being a Jew or being a resistance fighter, being a communist, and already being filtered to the camp system. We also know that some of these forced labor camps were run by literally people being rounded up and being brought to these forced labor camps, especially in the West towards the end of the war. This started happening where populations were picked up, or men were told from a certain age, if you were Belgian or Dutch, to report to an area, and then you were brought to one of these Arbeitslager for forced labor. Of course, if you were one of these men or women recruited versus imprisoned, the conditions were a little bit better. So again, the conditions in the Arbeitslager are not the same for every camp. If you were a Jew that was imprisoned in an Arbeitslager that was a mine or a quarry, the conditions were going to be horrible, and your chance of survival, as you can see here, the top picture right here on the left, are prisoners working at Mauthausen camp, at the construction of the Russia, actually, concentration camp there. Those conditions are immensely harsh. And that is quite different from example, the photo that you're going to see sorry, at Stadelheim is the bottom right corner, which was actually Arbeitslager, or a forced labor camp run by ACFA factory and by the corporation itself. They had some SS guards there, but mainly it was run by managers and directors from ACFA factory. And this is going to be for film production, part war production as well. So conditions really varied in these areas, and also how you worked, right? Sometimes it was in a factory, sometimes it was a mine, sometimes it was construction. The slave labor that was behind that Arbeitslager system was very varied. So hundreds, thousands of prisoners were part of this Arbeitslager, from prisoners of war to those recruited laborers that I just said, to actual prisoners as well. By the way, the picture on the top right is an image of the airplane factory at Flossenburg concentration camp, at one of the labor factories near Flossenburg. After it was liberated, that's why it was empty, but it kind of shows you the magnitude of this forced labor factory right here. And then on the bottom left, that is actually an image of a construction labor camp. Again, usually not what we think of as a labor camp, because it's just wide in the open, but it is actually a labor camp that was a part of the Neugamme concentration camp complex that worked on the construction of the Dover-Elbe Canal in Germany, just to kind of give you a variety of how these forced labor camps works. You can pull up images of forced labor camps that are literally German farms. So it's very different in how these look. The Euthanasia Centers. Again, these are very unique and very different from the other ones. very small, again, very similar to the, in a sense, to the death camps. They are very small because the focus is on murder. There is no holding of prisoners for a very long time. It's really entering and murdering and processing through, in a sense, of this industrialized murder. What is different from them from the death camps is that this system of murder of the mentally and physically disabled, because of protests within Germany, had to move underground. So these euthanasia centers, unlike the death camps, were not as much in your face, especially when we compare them to places like Auschwitz or Majdanek. And they're more, in a sense, hidden and secret with that. Also, in the occupied areas, they were usually formed in these kind of hospitals. And this is why I said they were run in hospital buildings. And then patients, or of course, those to be murdered, were brought to those. In Germany, there were 6 of these centers, Graveneck, Brandenburg, Bernburg, Hartheim, Sonnenstein, and Hadamar. And 13 additional, again, hospitals ran in occupied Poland that mainly were for Poles who are mentally and physically disabled to be murdered there. Interesting enough, in none of the other occupied territories were there these hospitals. Only areas that were going to be fully annexed into Germany do we see these 13 hospitals occurring as well. Prison of war camps, or the Stammlager, also known frequently as Stalag, but Stalag is just a wider term for a subcamp system within that. So the Stammlager are really the prison of war camps. Now, these are different. They are going to look like concentration camps and frequently are run like concentration camps, but they are run by the Wehrmacht, the German army, the Luftwaffe, and in one case also the Navy as well. And that makes a very different distinction with that. Here, we're not going to see SS guards, but we're actually going to see German army guards. In some cases, the SS is going to assist in supervision, but the ultimate supervision of the prisoner of war camps are going to lay with the army. And remember those numbers. This is not a small number of camps. We're talking about thousands of these camps, prison camps for prisoners of war. And the conditions of these camps really vary by what type of prisoner of war you are. If your country of origin is the Soviet Union or even Poland, the conditions are going to be much, much harsher. Just to give you a statistics in comparison of British and American POWs towards Soviet POWs is 50%, 57% of all Soviet POWs died in Nazi custody, mainly the Wehrmacht, versus 3.6% of British and American, and I think this is 36%, I need to know, I'm starting to down myself, is of British and American POWs. And this is a big distinction, actually, this 3.6. And this is a big distinction, and it shows a difference in the mentality of how the camp conditions were within the prisoner of war camps as well, but also the treatment outside. And I wanted to just kind of give you an idea of one of these camps, of some of the Soviet POW camps. There's not a lot of images, by the way, of POW camps where Soviets were imprisoned, frequently because they were filtered into other camp systems as well, or these camps were early on liquidated before the Soviets could liberate them, and then Soviets were sent on endless death marches until they died. But the photo on the fourth photo here in the row actually shows a German camp, a camp in Germany that was a Soviet POW camp. And what you see in those images right there, what look like dirt and bumps on the dirt, those are actually holes that are dug by the Soviet POWs in the ground as their shelter. as Germany, this is towards the end of the war when the bombing of Germany was happening, and these were their shelters, but there was no barracks left anymore. They literally lived, their imprisonment was around barbed wire with no barracks or anything. And that just kind of gives you an understanding of the conditions in the Soviet POW camps. The other images you can see are some of the US Army images as well that show the American prisoners of war and British prisoners of war. And then of course the big gates shows you how the Wehrmacht did model their camp system off the concentration camp system as well. On the image in the middle right shows the interrogation of Soviet POWs in POW camp in Poland as well. Deportation camps or Durchgangslager. These camps are also very small frequently because these are focused on short-term imprisonment. Their purpose is basically gathering Jews because they are mainly built for the deportation of Jews. They are frequently built near centers of large Jewish populations, such as Paris, Amsterdam, near Brussels or Antwerp. And they're mainly in Western Europe because what they are doing is they basically filter the Jews, just as the satellite camps do for the labor system. They bring Jews together, they round them up in these areas. Once numbers are met for the trains that will move to the death camps, until they are met, they keep filling these camps. Once the numbers are met, the trains leave and they start with the roundups for the next group and bring them in. Probably the three most well-known of the deportation camps are on the left-hand side on the image. You can see an image of Westerbork deportation camp, in the middle of Malin or Mechelen deportation camp, and on the right-hand side of Drancy, which is near Paris, the deportation camp there. Thousands of Jews are going to go through these camps, and they're basically antechambers before they get to the death camps. They're holding pens in a sense very similar to our next group here is the ghettos. They are also concentration areas. The difference between, of course, deportation camps is that for ghettos, these are going to exist for quite a long time and are massive. They become, in some cases, whole parts of cities like we see in Warsaw, with tens of thousands of Jews being forced into a very small area with horrible living conditions, 9 to 15 families in one apartment being stuffed together with very little food, very little medical supplies. That just creates the spreading of disease, as we will see in the ghetto system. The ghettos also vary. They also don't always look the same. I just refer to these large ghettos, but we also have in smaller towns more smaller ghettos that are just surrounded by barbed wire, and where we don't really see a big fence, but we just see a little gate and the surrounding of it, sometimes even some kind of pallets or hay bales that are surrounding it, to these massive ones. And that creates 3 levels of types of ghetto within the ghetto system. Is closed ghettos. Those are fully walled off, in which unless you have a special permit to leave as a Jew, you cannot leave. And there's a clear area inside and a non-area and a Jewish side. You have open ghettos who are frequently just formed by barbed wire, in which at curfew time, Jews are required to be inside that perimeter. But there is more flexibility of moving in and out of those ghettos. For example, the ghetto in Amsterdam, this is one in the west, but there's some other examples in the east as well, especially in the smaller towns. And then finally, destruction ghettos. These are actually more, in a sense, function as deportation ghettos. They are much smaller, and they basically concentrate Jews within the ghetto system to get them ready to deport them to the death camps. And that's what we call the destruction ghetto. So it's another layer, and we see different phasing in there as well. Okay, my last one before I run out of time is the brothels. As I mentioned before, not as much is known about them. We know that they were both run by the SS and by the Wehrmacht, so the army is involved in it as well. Sometimes they were near some of the concentration camps, but quite frequently they were not. For example, this image right here from the Bundesarchiv is a photo of a brothel in Brest in France, which was actually located. The reason you see the Star of David on here is because this was a former synagogue, and the Wehrmacht, this is actually a Wehrmacht brothel, so an army brothel, was built inside the synagogue on purpose. Sometimes, as you can see here, they are part of a camp. In that first image on the left here, this is a brothel camp at Gusen concentration camp. And you can see in the middle there, Himmler visiting as well. So from top to bottom, these brothels were very known as within the camp system as well. Okay, I hope this kind of helped give you a little bit of background on the camp system and the understanding behind it as well. And what kind of different camps are out there. I have a few more minutes left. If anybody has any questions or any comments, you're welcome to put them in the Q&A. That button should be in the bottom of your screen. One of the question was, you mentioned Dr. McGargy, was he a driving force behind this research? Do you know how long the process took to create the encyclopedia, and is it still going on research? While unfortunately Dr. McGargy passed away last year, this was a project that he had been working on since, I believe, the late 90s, and was still an ongoing project. And there's other amazing editors for the encyclopedia that have taken over this project. The last time I talked to him, he estimated that it would easily take him another 10 years to complete his work. So I assume that the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum is still documenting that and is still doing research in Europe as well to locate some of these sites. So yes, this is just like the mass graves for the Holocaust by bullets and by the Einsatzgruppe, the location and data pointing of the camp system is still an ongoing process and much needed. Thank you for that question. I'm going to turn it back over to Annie.
Thank you so much, Charlotte, as always. Oh, wait, I just want to make sure. Oh, we just got to thank you in the Q&A for sharing this information. I'll echo that as well. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. We hope to see you, whether virtually or in person, at future programs at the museum. I have put the link to our programs page in the chat there. And as Charlotte mentioned, we will send the links that she shared in her presentation tonight via email tomorrow, so you can explore some of those resources on your own as well. Thank you again, and have a great rest of your evening. See you next time.